Zoom, so I think we'd be okay to start.
Okay.
We'll watch for him. So give me about 15 seconds while this goes live. Anybody else wants to watch it? Okay, we will start.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just heard you talking about lighting gear. And that's
Yeah.
what I'm doing, some exchanging everything I bought several years ago.
We went to look pull over to have camping stuff out. It's like 70 days when we go, I can't believe the generational changes.
Oh, big improvements, yeah.
Okay, we're on.
Good to go.
Line, so we're going to start when you're ready.
Okay, well, let's get started. Welcome our massive crowd of one to our planning commission meeting tonight. And I suppose I should acknowledge this will be my maiden voyage here. I'm taking the reins from Wilf. And this is what happens when you don't show up to a meeting.
Exactly.
You get roped in as the chairman. That's fine, I'll do it willingly. So I think there's one slight change to our agenda, but first let's just open with the opening and approval of minutes from the August 13th meeting. Has everyone had a chance to review those? Any comments or motion to approve those minutes?
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
Is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, and I think we want to, Lyle, you can correct me if I'm wrong, maybe move the call to the public, which we typically do later, maybe to the front. If that's still the plan, let's have the call for the public and then we can proceed with the agenda.
Yeah, so I'll have them, you're welcome maybe even to sit just here close enough to the mic. So this is Mr. Van Noy, who is just interested in sharing some ideas with the planning commission.
Yeah.
So I've got some slides and things that he was hoping to present to you. And where everything's recorded, so we've kind of found the mask stifled up quite a bit. So with the distance we have here, you're welcome to take that off. And, just kind of front and center. You can let us know what you're talking about. I'll try and share your slides as well.
Okay.
And tell us your name and then go ahead.
So my name is Aaron Van Oy. That's right on the front of the slides there. And I live down on sort of West Kaysville, sort of by Snow Horse Elementary. I don't know if you guys know where that is. But I've driven by Webb Lane a lot, and there's this huge field. I think about things, what could go in there? And I love trees. And so naturally, I'm here to share with you guys some ideas that I have and see if it's even a feasibility of maybe using some of that open space that's currently open for something in the future that might be really fun for a lot of citizens. And so that's what I wanted to post to you guys, some ideas of Kaysville Forest. So if you go to the next slide. This sort of shows you where it's at. I don't know if you guys are familiar with where that's at. There's Angel Street Soccer Complex is just down Angel Street. And then there's that huge field where I have that little circle. And it's just a really big, and I think there's a farm off to the, off to the north a little bit. But yeah, that's a good picture of it. So what I was thinking, it'd be really neat to have a forest, a Kaysville forest that branches off the rail trail. So what I was thinking is that people could come off that trail right by, there's a little stream right there. We could make a little path and come into a forest and do some loops, and you'll see sort of my grandiose plans, which maybe are not quite feasible, but anyway, what I want to do is provide a lasting location for Kaysville residents to enjoy the forest experience. I've lived overseas and I've been to a lot of different forests, and it's a really amazing feeling when you get in a forest and when you feel trees around and you're within nature. And provide trails and enrich the lives of residents. And I was thinking that this could be a really good educational venue also as part of the forest. So the plan right now is where I need your guys' help, where I don't have any knowledge, is how do you go and get land? How do you work with the owners? I'm happy to help present ideas to the owners, and the public and anybody that I think we could get together and see who would be interested and who would provide support. But I wanted to share a long-term plan to see if it's even feasible. I think we could solicit grants, we could get funding. I would love for this to be a community owned, not necessarily a city. I don't want this to be a city money coming to it. I think it can easily, a forest is pretty easy to, once you get it up and running, rain does most of the work. So I want to include the community, have like a community board that would be like Friends of the Forest or something like that, and then start working. So if you go to the next one. So this is sort of some of the ideas that I had, and the sky's the limit on what we could do with this. Basically, I was thinking up at the top end near where the trail comes off the rail trail, is you could have flowering forest where you have fruiting trees that have, similar to like in DC, they have the cherry trees and they have maybe a little water feature or something there. And then you could have a ponderosa section, you could have a lodgepole section, you could have an oak section and maybe a redwood section. Sort of the sky's the limit. And I was thinking each of these sections could be several acres on that piece of property, and just having maybe a little stream that runs from the top to the bottom. And then if you go to the next one, I was thinking this is like 100-year plan, so I apologize for dumping all this on you guys. That's a long-term vision, but having like a phase 1 up on Webb Lane, and then potentially going down to the Saunders property and having forests down through there, and then eventually getting out into the sort of the lake area where you have a lot of space and you can do a lot of things. If you're familiar with the boardwalk that has the birds off of Gentile, it's a really amazing boardwalk out into the marshlands. It's really neat for families and people to go to. And I was thinking from phase 1 over to phase 2, it'd be really amazing to have like a bridge going over Angel Street. So you'd feel like you're out in nature crossing some type of stream, or in this case, it would be Angel Street. So if you go to the next one, I'm here to ask, if you have any questions or how to proceed. I'm looking to you guys to see if it's even a feasible option.
I guess first thing I would say is this is a good meeting to have this kind of discussion, because usually in a call to the public, we just kind of let people come up and say their thing, but I think this is an opportunity to have an interaction like this. So any questions, comments?
Do you guys like the idea?
It's a great
Thoughts?
idea.
Concerns?
Well, the first part would be acquiring the property.
Yeah.
It's not gonna be cheap.
It's gonna be cheap. I mean, you got an acre of land just sold in Layton on the west side for $195,000.
That's actually low.
Well,
Kaysville.
Well, this was,
Kaysville,
this is west side, far west side out.
Yeah, I mean, West Kaysville, half an acre is close to 300, 275.
Yeah, you're facing.
Yeah.
Improved lots over 400.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're talking, how many acres is that parcel?
I'm guessing, so I'm not positive, but maybe 20 acres. I don't know. I can look it up.
I don't know.
I was trying to get ready with it.
I'm hoping that they donate it.
I was gonna look, I don't know if we have the Wi-Fi connection or something here, but,
28 acres.
and is it one owner, do we know, or? who-
That piece is, so
Is that Webster's?
council member would know more about it, but the Wagstaff, I believe is the name on it. It's one big parcel of 28 acres, and
They haven't had council this year.
I know they've leased it to some ranchers in the past. I haven't seen them up personally this year, so.
Well, the cows haven't been out west because of the West Indies corridor. As it's shown from where the property that was acquired by UDOT is where they've kept in the past, and since the acquisition for West Indies, they've torn that down. So that's, I think your land costs are going to, I know from past experience over in Hess Farms, there was a similar proposition. It was on that Farmington Kaysville border. And the neighborhood really would have liked this and kind of pushed for it. And it's all homes now. Because the kids played in there, the creek ran right through it. And I think, it's good to have these discussions again and talk with the developers coming forward, because preserving open space, preserving park, particularly where you have the RNG railroad connection there, is good. I think trying to preserve this much space is gonna be a hard sell, particularly when the land values are so high. I also think, you know, it's hard to get dollars towards these things. That's what individuals found out over on the other side of Kaysville. This was almost 10 years ago, in trying to preserve that. They worked with foundations, they worked with private landowners, they worked with several groups trying to do that. I think, you know, just kind of, you know, roundabout, citizen-wise, it'd be better to get involved in processes that's being developed and encourage the development to encourage more open space, more access. That would be my kind of thought process forward. I like it. I mean, it's a neat idea. I think we do need more open space, more access.
I think, what do you guys think about the trail going from the rail trail, you know, where everybody, there's a lot of people that use that trail, and maybe getting out to the lake where there'll be, I would say, almost indefinite space.
Is there gonna be a trail on West Davis border? by the way?
I heard that there was.
23 miles of uninterrupted trail where you do not have to do a crossing on any intersection.
Because it'll be on the west
It'll
side.
be on the west side, and it's been designed, so for the design right now is so that it will be uninterrupted. So it'll be, so you can ride or bike without, or walk or bike without having to be in an intersection at any point on that trail.
It'll actually be on the east side of the freeway.
It'll be on the east side.
Farmington and Kaysville.
Okay.
Headed west, not typically. So you could connect into it with systems like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the idea for connection and having a pathway is something to bring forward as development is coming forward. I think that's is something that's good. We've seen that in other developments. I've probably seen that. I've seen that in Utah County with the Burdock Canal Trail and other trails.
Jordan Road.
Jordan River. I rode Sunday from Draper down into Lehigh and back, all on trails without having to cross the streets. So I think it has value.
Any other thoughts or comments?
It's a great idea. I think, you know, the major issue is going to be cost.
Yeah.
And,
Well,
has the city constituted its Parks and Recreation Board yet?
I don't know that the council, Peakover has actually formally selected the board. I know that the process is happening. Councilman Pike recalls differently, but I believe that the intent is there would be a parks board that would help explore ideas and systems and propose items to the council and help vet some things through. I don't think I've seen conservation, I guess, or
Yeah.
the official.
So it's not actually up and running yet. This would be a good thing for them to discuss as well. But I guess we're also looking at our general plan update. There is some parks. There is some parks and recreation planning effort going on.
Yeah, so that could be a good one, and what could come out of that if there's interest in this, and we could forward this to the council as well, is just kind of testing the pulse of the community of, you know, what are their interest in these types of spaces, and what the trade-offs are, that they're willing to take on the cost to get it or not. So we could ask that group if they want to put that in as part of their scenarios and opportunities that we could look at collectively as a city and help the community understand we want it, just what it might cost or what it would take to get there, or rather preserve other places, or just have the trails, or, you know, the sky's the limit, so we can test it through that process.
Lyle, is there any land set aside for future parks in Kaysville right now? It's been designated or targeted? Or a plan, a 20-year plan to have so many acres available?
The only piece that I'm personally aware of, I don't think that the city's planning on acquiring any new property. We have some property off of Crestwood Road that could be used for a park, up near Highway 89. Otherwise,
So what piece acquired out just off of Wellington?
well, so there are some parks that are partially developed. So the west end of 200 North, we've taken over some park space from some owners associations. just about, the Case Creek Elementary, just east of that a little bit, and that's right off Wellington. So that was something that recently the city acquired from those developments. But yeah, I'm not personally aware of acquisition of land, even with a recent impact fee analysis. I don't think land costs showed on that as something that was anticipated, but those things can change if they're interested.
Pioneer Park, I guess, was the last major park, domino, I guess, in the plan, maybe.
Yes, I believe
That was all donated.
Was it?
that was largely donated. I think there was some properties purchased by the city to make it happen.
But the improvements are off the charts.
Great.
Yeah, it's a great park.
I don't know, a third of the way into what they hoped for it, but someday. But yeah, this general plan, I'll kind of discuss a little bit is how many parks are there sufficient for the number of residents you have to provide the level of service that the community deems appropriate. It may determine that maybe we ought to look at additional park space and spell out a vision for that. And this could be the type of space that people would like to see.
I think comment I would have is, we could probably find a bunch of reasons not to do it, of course. But I think in the abstract, it's a good idea. And, it's citizens like yourself and others that maybe you could gather that drive these kinds of ideas, whether it's this idea or anything else that could improve our community. So my thought is, I see multiple challenges, some that are already mentioned, others that are maybe more practical. And I'm curious maybe what your background is, but I see, because I have some background in landscape architecture, and this sounds like a project that would have been, proposed sort of in undergraduate and said, hey, this is a great idea. Now let's go and move and do it. And then they fall flat. But if there's motivation behind it, they can be carried through. But then there's practical things like, what's the climate here? What's the hardiness zone for these trees that we want? What's the soil? Those sorts of things that are practical things that are going to be hurdles. But like I say, we could have a bunch of reasons not to do it, but if you have a desire and motivation, I think it's possible. It may be a challenge, but if it's a long-term thing and you talk to the property owners, sounds like the city may not be interested in participating. I don't know, you could convince the council maybe that they want to participate. But if you talk to the property owner and you see that there's a possibility, or you look more into funding, sources and see that it's possible, the sky's the limit, I guess, is how I would look at it. But certainly there's a lot of practical hurdles to get over.
Question for you guys. Is there somebody on this group that would want to be maybe a champion for this cause and work with me? Because I would be happy to go to the property owners and talk to them and just feel them out. But I feel oddly strange as a citizen just going to somebody and pitching an idea that doesn't have any real background. But if one of you were part of that, I think that would provide some credence to that the planning commission is looking into this. We want to see what's available. So that would help me a lot, because then it's not just some random guy coming to somebody and saying, hey, I want to put a forest on your property.
Yeah.
So that's, I would love that. And then I would love to try to get a hold of these other property owners and work through the city to try to do that. And just, because, if they both say, no, we're going to sell it, and it's going to be multi-millions of dollars, and that would maybe temper my enthusiasm a little bit.
I think the multi-million-dollar part is probably
That's low.
accurate
It's-
and
that's
low.
low.
Yeah, low. Maybe tens of millions.
It's 8 to 10 million would be the,
Yeah.
and that's not,
Undeveloped.
and not only that, we live in a desert.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The
some of
reality
these trees are gonna be tough to
You'd
grow.
have to irrigate everything.
I've got ideas for that.
One suggestion I could give you is, so a gentleman by the name of Dave Anderson is, last I heard, and it wasn't too long ago, is sort of the executive director of the Utah Botanical Center there with the ponds, which is Utah State University.
Utah State.
Yeah, it's got like the wetland center, and then there's the botanical center that many species were transferred from where it used to be over at the interchange of sort of Main Street and Cherry Hill and 89. That's where the botanical center used to be. anyway, he's a landscape architect. He's the executive director of that. And it's they actually have a similar plan for that Utah Botanical Center from what you've proposed here. It's already kind of in flux there, or in going forward. And they have a decades-long vision for that. He might know of resources that are available for something like this. If anything, you could get a team of free, bright young minds from Utah State University to add their, ideas that could further this.
I'm not worried about what this will turn out to be.
Okay, yeah.
It'll be amazing. And I think we'll have a team of people. There'll be an arborist. There'll be all sorts of people on the committee, that plans this out. So I'm not worried about that. I'm most worried about getting
And I think that's
off
your
the first step.
biggest challenge is probably that first step in acquiring land.
And we can help you contact the property owners, and maybe that's the first step is to test their interest. And they have a ton of say in this as to what they're interested in.
I mean,
It seems like gotta get some reading though about whether the council's even willing to entertain the idea. Because they might be a little bit disconcerting if they start getting calls from property owners saying, hey, is the city gonna buy my land? And the council's going, what?
Yeah. And it sounds like maybe you would prefer public involvement, meaning involvement from the city.
absolutely.
But it doesn't need that. I mean, that would probably help from your perspective, but it's not impossible without it. It makes it harder, I think. And maybe the last thing I'll say, if there's any other comments, is we are certainly, I think, a body to talk to, but probably the more important body is the council. And if you could make a similar presentation to get their thoughts, and this would be something that would go through multiple councils, I would bet, over the years. But yeah.
That's why I think the Parks and Recreation Board that's gonna be set up would also be important to have involvement in this, but because they're not quite set up yet.
I'll double check on see what their status is at it. If that's a group that can turn you on to, that you can reach out to. You need a resource.
But is there anybody here that feels like they would like to champion this? Because if I can't get you guys to feel some fire in you, then I don't know if it's worth it. You guys are my first litmus test to see if there's even, does it even pass the muster for you guys to get excited about this?
I'll speak up first. Maybe it's the pessimist in me, but I don't see it being practical enough to be realized. So I don't know if I can get behind it, to be honest.
No, that's exactly what I want to hear.
Yeah.
I think it's.
Hey guys, this is Quan. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah. Go ahead, Quan.
I'm willing to be a champion.
Oh, there you go.
There you go. What was your name again?
Quan Nguyen. You can, my contact information is on the website.
He's one of our commissioners. He's just remote.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Thanks, Quan. Feel free to jump in anytime. Yeah. So, any other comments or?
Well, I'll just agree. I think that the price points can be a huge hurdle, and highest and best use of land like this in that location.
Which comes
And
down to
I
price.
know of the people that own that, and they do a lot of philanthropy. So maybe there could be something there, but that is such valuable land in that location. That would be a tough hurdle to overcome.
I agree. I think though, that maybe, and this is where you go through the planning process. If you look in the developments north, they put a trail system in there. I think developing a trail system that is xeriscape and natural-scape, and that's the process you work through with it. And I think it has value. It has value to the community, and we're in the community, we just want to make sure as it's going through. I think there's some of that plays into it. But I know the value of the land. I mean, you're talking a lot of money for 28 acres. But I like the idea. I mean, it plays well. It fits into long-term vision. It's just how do you get in there financially? I don't know if that's in the landowner's best interest.
I just want to fill it out and see how feasible it is, and then I think just step through it and see where it goes. I'm not really interested in having like a bunch of houses and a little trail through it. I wouldn't really want to participate in that too much.
Yeah.
It'd be great, but
Well, thank you for your presentation. Yeah.
Thank you.
We're always open to hear good ideas, so. Let's proceed with our agenda. So the next item, and I think the bulk of our agenda, we'll take up this item, which is a discussion about PRUD ordinance, reviewing a number of items, common open space, private street, flag lots. So maybe I'll turn some time to Lyle.
Yeah, we'll get an introduction to this. And again, it's on as discussion. What we're looking for is kind of initial direction from you guys this evening on moving forward. I've got Councilmember Blanken, who's familiar with some of the items we've been discussing on this internally. We're ready to bring forward to the commission. There's been some interest from Commissioner Lyon, for example, on the flag lot portion of this section of the ordinance. So I'll give just kind of a brief introduction of what it is, what some of the big things are that are of interest to discuss. And, I think I'd be looking for some big direction takeaways, if there are very specific things you'd like to see. You're welcome to do that. But before we notice a public hearing, just making sure we have the ordinance right and type in the right sections, that would be the next step to use that direction this evening. So I'm going to pull this over on the big screen. But the PRUD section of the ordinance, the planned residential unit development, is essentially the ability for the city to consider variations from a standard development. So within these individual zoning districts, you'll have an R120, for example, as a fixed minimum lot width, fixed minimum lot size, and so generally, abutting public streets, you see very similar lots established within that district. And then each district would likewise have some of those minimum regulations, lot width, lot size, that would be followed. The purpose of this, I can sit here and allow some greater flexibility if someone can prove that they can better design and better product for the city. That will allow, we can cluster things to preserve open space, more creativity in the arrangement, different product types on it. So I'll read it verbatim. And it falls primarily into three categories that the city's set up over time to allow for consideration of these developments. So skip down to that. Of course, I always go back. So generally, common open space development is one that's very common here in Kaysville. We still know west side of town. It's a little bit more recent. The ordinance is provided for that, but the idea being within a zoning district where you would typically see maybe an R120, for example, roughly 2 units per acre type development. The city said, okay, we'll allow you to have a few units per acre, but the common open space says you got 100 acres of land, 2 units an acre, simple math, that's 200 homes. We'll let you be flexible how you put those homes on that land, so long as you provide us with some open space, trails, such as kind of the idea that Commissioner Lyon tossed out on our property, parks, or items that generally we see come about through that process. One of the big things that's popped up with this is common open space subdivision has these general standard requirements under what you look for, but it states the following standards apply unless variations are approved in the development agreement. So when these come before the planning commission, ultimately the council, typically the developer's going to have an agreement that says, okay, here's what I want. I'm looking for flexibility in these ways. And development agreement is something that there's two parties will have to agree to it. There's a lot of flexibility or discretion on whether or not you want to do that. But there have been some difference in interpretation on that, how much flexibility there really is. And so at a bare minimum, there's interest in clarifying what can we really deviate from, what really should we really deviate from by development agreement. Setbacks has been one that's commonly popped up where can somebody really be closer than the standard 30 or 20 feet that's outlined here for a private street. The If not, we could make that more clear and say, okay, you know, you can't go any closer than that. But maybe you can be flexible on the amount of open space you provide in that agreement. Again, there's a standard, it's typically 25, 30%, I think is about what it pops up to when you do the math. So looking at these items, if there's interest in any of the, again, I think as a minimum, the councilman, would encourage the commissioner to interact here to maybe clarify where some of the interest is. Do we want to have that kind of flexibility? So there's also been concern expressed from the council level of, we're looking at a lot of, we'll call them case by case, you know, very unique developments. Everybody's asking for something different instead of people asking for it and then trying to be more fair, following a similar set of the same rules. So there's that flexibility, even still something that's of interest to continue, or should we simply be encouraging people to go within the designations and districts that we have, rather than having all these one-off projects that each can become a little bit unique. So same thing for the private street subdivision type. So I'm going to kind of brush quickly through this to begin a discussion. Private street subdivision, the difference between that and the standards, so these are different types of developments, is, as its name implies, the street is owned in private, so it's not a dedicated public right of way, meaning private property owner owns and controls and maintains that street. With that, there's some different standards that are written below, but again, you see the variations may be approved by development agreement. What, if anything, do we really want to give that flexibility on through development agreement? And how could that be made more clear? With a private street, and we see different types where the lot owns part of the street. Sometimes it's owned by an HOA in common. So there are different ways that they have been set up traditionally that are creating different types of developments. And are we happy with what we're seeing? Do we want to encourage anything different through that? Or set it up for a different process to consider what people know that they're going to follow, you know, a different set of standards. Commissioner Lyons can probably speak a little bit more directly to the flag lot subdivision. I'll try and just quickly summarize. A lot of communities have moved away from the flag lot subdivision, even here in Davis County. They're still allowed here and there, but generally there's some advocacy for, you know, as I correctly stated when telling this wrong, but seeing a little bit more assemblage of property to create more cohesive developments, a little bit more comprehensive, rather than just a one or two lot here and there. So Brew Heights, for example, allows them, but in order to do a PRDD within their jurisdiction, you have to have 2 acres of property need to be considered. By the time you have 2 acres, you might be looking at doing something different than just a flag lot. So there's
Senator moved the same direction, and theirs was privacy concerns as well as some other concerns, public safety concerns there, and some of the other municipalities.
So we'd be looking to get your feedback as a commission this evening on are there big issues that you're interested in tackling. I think the direction from the council we're hearing is at least, again, like I said, at a minimum, let's make it more clear on what should and shouldn't be flexible within this. And if there's a better route to encourage any of these types of developments opinions as we run forward, maybe open it for discussion and kind of dive in from there. I can help with that, but again, I don't know if the council have questions, maybe from that end, we'd be happy to present that to them. But we've seen a handful, just as an example from the commission lately, where we're seeing things that developers are again asking for maybe variations in setbacks or lot size and combination thereof. And the commission council, I think, are struggling a little bit from the passage of the baton from one to the other with recommendation on what really is the current vision. And I think part of that is simply an understanding of how much flexibility could there be or should there be there and should be applied. So putting up a set of rules that spilling out might help bridge some of the gap between the two bodies, so. If that makes any sense. Be very clear what's gonna be coming forward from body to body. On the senators.
Are we giving too much flexibility, or there's too much flexibility written in the code and its interpretation thereof going forward?
Could be both, right? And it may be that there's a feeling too much leniency is given. And I think that's kind of shown through the different bodies looking at projects differently, where one group is saying, yeah, this is great. I think the council saying that's probably too lenient, too much flexibility. Should the code even allow that? Maybe another part. Again, there's been debate on, does it even already allow that much? And so I think just the mere fact that there's debate on it means there's probably room to clarify at least that portion.
Discussion, I mean, it's just kind of an informal opportunity for us to discuss things. So we could talk just generally, or maybe we can go specific on flag lots, common open space, private streets, whatever. Will, did you have something?
Well, just generally, I mean, the trend is kind of going towards doing development by development agreement. That seems to be more and more what's happening all over the place. And it's probably a pretty good way to go, because what you're really doing is you're nailing down pretty specifically what the city will allow in flexibility in return for specific things that the applicant or the developer is agreed to do. And so I think if our code will allow for flexibility, it's a good thing. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be granted. That's where you get into negotiations, and then just, you know, put it in the framework of you have to have a development agreement. But then allow for a fair amount of flexibility. And then it's, you know, really kind of becomes the issue of what is it that you're looking for in order to allow the flexibility. And that's maybe the little tougher part. When do you grant the flexibility for what?
Yeah, I think we've seen some of these where, and I think I've struggled sometimes where it's like the developers coming in and asking for something, and you're kind of like, well, what are you really asking for now?
Yeah.
By the time we get to the end of it, you're like, well, why don't we just start there and back into it? And that's kind of where I think sometimes there's vagary in the code.
It's the tough part is writing into, one of the things that happened when I got to Salt Lake City was Salt Lake City had, it wasn't so much PUD, it was just kind of the way the code was written. But it had standards, and then it allowed for variations from the standards. Didn't really have a lot of anything in there to say when you would grant those variations in the standards. So what was happening was that everybody came in and asked for the variations. And pretty much everybody got them, just by asking for them. And so it was kind of like, well, what have you got the original standards for if you're going to allow them to be varied all the time? And so really the question then becomes is, have your standards and then allow for variations, but some kind of a guide in there to say, this is what we expect though, in order to grant the variations.
So you're saying
Improved design, improved, you know, flexibility, improved cost, affordability, something.
Yeah, more amenities.
Yeah.
Help the
Yeah.
public.
And that was an example that I, as Will speaking, so I know when I worked with Mill Creek, for every amenity, they had point values for a swimming pool,
Yeah.
you know, had a lot of points versus a swing set, didn't have very much. Could add
So you're
additional
talking like if
density or.
you're talking if they do,
reduce
if the
open
builder, if
space.
the builder built a park as part of the development, you would give them points towards in the framework.
Yeah, you could do that, so you could say, you know, minimum is 10%, you want flexibility in your lot size, give you extra open space, and I'll give you extra.
Because in Morgan, we have this, in Morgan County, we have the same thing.
Instead of just wide open, ask for something different. So that could be an idea of a type of standard. Yeah, and we don't have to settle in on maybe that topic, but maybe that's a route that the commission would be interested in is, yeah, we're not just legislating on the fly, you win and you don't because I like you and I don't like you, but you did in fact provide A, B, and C, so therefore we want to give you that.
I mean, a lot of development agreements allow for some variation from what's normally allowed, but what you can't do in the development agreement is you can't allow things to happen that aren't allowed for in your code. So you have to have the ability to be able to do that in your code. So that's why having some maximum flexibility is a good thing in your code, so that you have that discretion as you do a development agreement. But you also probably need something in your code that says, to get the variation from the standards, you need to do some things. And you know, I mean, Lyle just points out, like in Mill Creek, they actually have a point system for various kinds of things. That's good. I mean, it's a way to try and quantify it, but when you do that, you can never think of everything, right? And one developer will come along and say, well, what if I do this? And you go, oh, wow, that's a really good idea. But our code doesn't say anything about that.
We put it in 2 miles of street,
Yeah.
outside the development.
So, you know, it's a tough thing to do.
Is the state giving any guidelines to help counties and towns? With some boundaries on and guidance?
Not so much from the state, but you see jurisdictions around, some of the, you know, professional groups around have some, and I mean, you just look around what's done in various places around the country.
You know, like on the Twill Valley, they had a lot of talk out there recently about development.
No kidding.
Oh my God.
And yeah, what's interesting, 4 years ago, they spent $100,000 in taxpayer dollars to come up with a master plan on how you would develop an unincorporated Twill County.
Yep.
And they had community input like what we're doing in Kaysville right now. And yet with all that input and everything that got approved, they're still turning down projects.
That's happened in Layton several years ago too.
County.
Still turning down projects because the vocal minority are fighting for any development.
And it is, we ran across the same thing up in Morgan County, where we had project after project come forward. They met the code, they met everything else, and they get turned down because exactly what you're saying. That vocal minority shows up, it's like, well, we just don't want this. So,
Yeah, they just don't want it.
and it's interesting because now you're starting to see the projects coming in the areas, in the Green counties and Box Elder and in these counties. They'll come forward again. The code, if the code allows it, eventually it's allowed. It's allowable use.
The state has passed law, I guess, earlier this year to make it harder for referendum votes so that vocal minority can't override what most of the citizens agreed to in a master plan approach.
I don't know if they made it harder, really.
Did they more signatures? You need
Yeah,
more
well, yeah.
people to sign out. It forces a vote, and that delays the development a couple of years at least. Anyway, it's interesting, the forces going on here.
I have a question that I'd either be curious your guys' thoughts or experience or observations with, or maybe even from Lyle. And this goes for either open space subdivisions, flag lots, or the private streets. Is there some problem that we've been witnessing that is forcing this discussion, or are we having a discussion to solve a problem that doesn't exist?
Yeah, who's pricking who right now?
I'll take an answer on that. So the flag lot piece is something that came from the mission, so maybe the mission might see, but I think it's an observation from other communities. Certainly something that at least that they've seen an approach to push for preferred type of development. So again, not a lot of communities are doing it because they prefer things maybe to happen in a different way. I would say from my vantage, I've not seen issues with the flag lots that we've done in Kaysville necessarily. But if there were preference to say, we'd rather see other things happening in lieu of that, then that's, I think, primarily the crux behind that. Correct there, Steve. So that's where it's due that. I think there's a sentiment at large on the PRD overlay zone that we're just being too flexible, giving too much to developers with very little reason to do so.
Yeah.
So that's my take on it.
Where's that, is that sentiment coming from? The residents, neighbors, council?
Probably
All of the above.
So very specifically, and this has been done in public, I think one of the very first nexuses is there's a lack of clarity on how it's read. So that's, Mike and I would say that we've expressed in public meetings, different ways of reading it. So that's one item that started all of it is, it ought to at least be clear, even if it accomplishes the exact same thing, we shouldn't be back and forth. Some of it's code very well, seeing it a different way. So that's an absolute thing I think that can be done better is clarify it. And then it goes, this input from I think the council and the community is, people are coming asking for things all the time, and are they really providing greater, more desirable development or not, and finding a better way to quantify it and show that, yeah, you earned a reason to receive some flexibility.
And to answer your question, the reason I backed into this is because we have that huge fight down there on Wet Lane. And after that, I started looking,
The flag lot?
the flag lot.
Uh,
I went and talked to Jeff Euler, who's the county planner, and said, okay, you're the planner, he's the planner for South Weaver and for Drew Heights, a contractor in the county. And he said, we don't have anyone. They got rid of both those committees 2 years ago. And so he said, what we did is a 2-acre minimum. He said, the reason they did that, for example, kind of reasons were, they set a standard for development, which was very clear in that they did it as a PRD overlay. And he said, and Jeff talked the reasons why, and there was some in the code. He said it had some issues with neighbors, it had some issues with closest homes, and some public safety issues and fire safety issues. And then I called and talked to a couple of city managers who I know in the county. They centered a little bit with their public safety, some privacy issues there. And so you've got, and I just, if we want to, if we're going to change it, let's change it for the right reason, correct? But also, I think if we want good zoning, we want good development, let's encourage that through better overlay that encourages the correct type of zoning, the correct type of amenities in the community.
I think there's no question that our PRD ordinance could use some updating. And the things I think that it could use is better standards. Well, I would encourage maximum flexibility, but better standards for granting that flexibility. And stipulating that pretty much that it has to be embodied in the development agreement. That the planning commission and the council have to approve and sign off on. And those are the basic things. What those standards should be.
And for when, what are the triggers for granting them?
Yeah, the standards and triggers, yeah.
Are there other mechanisms or similar processes that is taken in here? You can think of where the accomplish similar things that we have.
You don't understand this.
You can hear 12, 15 zoning districts, that will allow different things. I've seen in Orange City, just as an example, rather than do things by development agreement, it ultimately gets you the same.
Yeah.
So they essentially create a zone for every project that we want, and codify it that way, but
Right.
frankly, it might be easier to administer because you're looking at districts rather than having to pull out results on everything.
I've heard it both ways. I've heard some say that the Orem is a good example of a city that creates very specific zones based on the negotiated development. And it seems to me like that's a nightmare.
But that's what happens when you have, that's what happens when you have an engineer who's your, serious, you have an engineer who's a
Yeah,
planning director, he's good, but he's thorough.
yeah. But by the same token, I mean, it's really, I think, kind of sixes either way.
I'm curious what maybe Larry thinks or Toby or Quan. I have some comments, but if you guys want to chime in.
I've never seen you without.
I was gonna say, what, you, no comments, or?
I could keep my mouth shut if you want.
Well, hey, just my opinion, I really like the Wilson. The thing is, as time goes on, situations change. You never want to be put in a box. And like, for example, we're talking about flag lots and different things. If all of a sudden secondary water goes up 10 times more expensive than it is now, which is a reality down the road, I mean, that's where it's going. These people aren't going to be able to, there is no way, I mean, they're gonna want those flag lots, or they're gonna want to develop that land because they will not be able to afford to maintain it. And then if you don't maintain it, what do you have? Just a big old weed patch, which Utah's, our weeds, we can grow devil's paintbrushes really well around here. So I guess.
They're native grasses, Larry.
Indian tobacco.
Okay.
So I guess the thing I'm saying is we need to be careful how we develop, but we also need to understand that situations change. And that's the thing we're facing, especially in Kaysville here. Our land is very expensive, it's tough, you know, 2-acre lots are not, they're not even approachable anymore for the vast majority of people. And it's interesting that I met a person the other day, in fact, 2 days ago, that's living in Layton, that lived in West Kaysville, and he moved for that reason, because he felt that he wanted to raise his family in a more diversified neighborhood instead of just the same people that Kaysville is bringing in, no matter what. And a lot of it's economics. It's expensive, so only certain people can afford to live in Kaysville. And so I just think that, I think we need to be careful how we approach this and not shut it down and just say, hey, a rule's a rule. If the racehorse stumbles, let's don't shoot it.
I think my comment would be, I like what Will is proposing as well. I think that the tricky thing is how it makes exceptions, because with that flexibility, there's a lot of responsibility on the council and the commission to get it right, you know, so.
Yeah, my question kind of, you might have guessed, alluded to my concern or my hesitation. And that is, you know, on one hand, I'm not one to say we just stick with the status quo for the sake of it. If things can be improved, I'm for that. But sometimes my fear is in a situation like this, or in many other situations with municipal government, oftentimes, you know, we have planners or elected officials who are successful individuals in other areas of life, and they bring that problem solving, let's create better things mindset to their role, and they create, and the governmental role is different from a private role, and creating, you know, solutions in a private role is different than in a governmental role. And you get into the governmental role, and the way you solve problems is you create laws and you create codes and things. And sometimes, again, those are good improvements, but creating laws to create problems that maybe aren't necessarily there or are being identified by the vocal minority is, I don't think, always the best approach. So if there really are truly problems with any common open space subdivisions we've seen, let's talk about what the problems are and then how we can change, how we can address those problems. But if we look at the common open space subdivisions as the example, and we don't see many identifiable problems, then why create more law? Or maybe we're not creating more law, we're creating different law. Why do that if we don't see any issues with what's been there? Or we could say that with flag lots or whatever. Like, so, I mean, the Webb Lane one is a perfect example, I think. In my opinion, that was the vocal minority. If it's the one I'm thinking of, it was taking 2 acres and putting a flag lot on it or something like that. I mean,
It was like
okay, but it was well under the 2 acre per lot general plan, you know, suggestion, I guess we have. It was well under that density requirement. And yet you would have thought that we were developing this 28 acres that Mr. Van Noy is wanting to do good things with. You would have thought we were putting in, you know, 300 units in there, the way that the citizens responded. And so if we're responding to those kinds of concerns with this discussion, I don't know that it's the right response, because that to me seems like it's the vocal minority. You know, if we talked about what the citizens as a whole think, which is what the general plan outreach has been all about, and we're hearing that people don't like flag lots, for example, or people don't like the common open space subdivision one that I think this is PRUD, someone correct me if I'm wrong, but the development, I can't remember who the developer was, north of the Angel Street soccer complex. Was that a PRUD common open space subdivision?
The Ship Farms project, I think is probably referring to, it was done as such.
And what they got out of it was, there are several lots in there that are pretty small for West Kaysville standards. But there's open space, and, you know, do we, as a planning commission, think that that's a type of subdivision that we want to get away from? Perhaps, I don't know, but if so, what are the problems that we identify there, and how can we address them? Because I think a lot of people could point to that one and say, hey, that's not a bad amenity, and there's a lot of great citizens of Kaysville that live out there, and the open space is great. Yeah, there's a few smaller lots. So, long story short, I don't know if this is a improvement of the code, that's a good thing. But if it's addressing problems that either don't exist or that are brought to us by the vocal minority, I don't know if that's what we should be responding to.
And this is an attorney that's cutting down his workload. I mean, I can't believe you preaching this, you know?
Yeah, there you go. See?
I thought legislation is to create litigation.
Some attorneys, maybe.
It's called full employment.
Not this one, yeah.
So again, this is the very first time we've chatted about it, so it's kind of just on the spot. Here's what we're seeing. What I'm hearing, and again, we'll have a chance to see some changes, is keep the flexibility in there, clarify with better standards how you qualify to be considered for that. And then I warned a couple sentences at the very least where we can clarify when and what can be varied and deviated from. So what I will do is I will put out a notice to put this out as a public hearing, because the interest from the council level to have before the planning commission, you get to see those changes in the public hearing. If you want to make some comment, of course, with the actual text, we'll weigh in on whether you want to see those changes or not. So good.
So you'll have like the red line and the additional language that not only we'll see, but the public will see and be able to comment on.
Yeah, and you'll have that ahead of time with the typical packet, so you can override. So this tonight, just an introduction to it. Wanted to have discussion to get the proper notice and go through the proper process. Start here, get the direction of when we can. Any other last marks here before we move on to the next item? Close out of this.
Yeah, I don't have anything else. If not, we could maybe go to the discussion on general plan process, the update, I guess.
Yeah, so I thought I'd take just a couple minutes. A couple members on the commission, or maybe more previous, some things are out with this, but to show you not completely what's been done, but some highlights maybe where things are at, and just so that you're aware of what's coming up in the future. And a lot of this plays in, you know, if it's either park spaces, maybe how that can tie in, so we'll bring that up, or what is the majority of the city looking for. So we did the initial outreach to the public over the month of June primarily, trickled into July a little bit. I'll show you some of the data and things that have come out of that, if just your interest, and we're learning from the consultant from that input. They are working now on creating from that data different alternatives or scenarios. Okay, so you've said you want these things, here's different ways to include that within your community. And we'll be back out to the public to say, see what they like and what they don't like about those alternatives. And it does a couple things that kind of helps you understand trade-offs. If we do it all this way, here are the pros, here are the cons. If we do it in option B, here's the pros and cons. And what might come out of it is an option C that was not even on the table with all of that. But it helps facilitate some comment. So when I spoke with the consultant today, they're still hoping, again, with all this data, end of September, first part of October, to put that out there. So there'll be some steering committee groups that will get some feedback prior to that. Still trying to find the best ways to get in-person meetings with that. Typically with those scenarios and alternatives, you sit with a group in small groups around the table, and you comment, running that together, so you're working in close proximity, that may work out very well. So we're hoping to get that in person, but there may also continue to be that online, just based on the nature where we're at. What they're continuing to preach is, frankly, we're getting more participation that way than they typically see in an in-person event. So some combination of both will still be determined. But here's what's kind of coming out. So with the public comment that was open, they had about 7,500 visitors to the website. Just learn about the general plan a little bit. Of course, I say visitors, that's visits. About 2,000 of those are unique users. So when you think a city 30,000 plus, about 2,000 people visiting to do it. Frankly, isn't that bad when you think of a public meeting and we might have come in person to attend something. So we had a lot of people that learned about it. Spent a few minutes on it, a lot more, spent more time, and actually left the comments. Almost 450, 430 it says there on the map itself. And then there were additional, so if you put, I don't know, build a high rise on the corner of Main and 200, people could put a thumbs up or thumbs down on that. So the comments don't count how many people liked or didn't like something. So there's additional participation beyond those. But those are unique ideas, concerns that people put in it. We had a questionnaire where 250 people or so participated in that, and a mutual preference survey. And this is a heat map that related to the comments that people left. So you can see in red, primarily that's where people were commenting and leaving things. So you see the key issues on the left. People are concerned about preserving open space, concerns about housing density. When it came to the land use component, transportation, people were very interested in the active transportation network and a few intersections and how easy it is to get around. A lot of comments about rec center, towards the trail system, parks, and dog park, and then transforming our downtown into a destination, as it says here, and bringing in some additional commercial services, so things like restaurants or things that people wish people had more of comments that came up. What would you like to see? Well, how has Kaysville handled growth in recent history? It's about 50-50, good and bad. When you take the light blue and the red, what would you like to see different about how growth is handled? The traffic is the big one, so nobody likes to wait at the intersection and take longer to get where they need to go. But address overcrowding, retain larger lots, so preserving kind of the sense of the community that we moved into. Less high density housing, so those are highly similar comments. More parks, trails, better design of the housing that's coming in, more commercial, more affordable housing, commercial design standards improved, prioritize community goals over economic development gains, and downtown revitalization, and then at the bottom, limiting commercial development. So probably no surprise, but this is just one page example. So the visual preference survey, if you didn't do it, was take just a quick glance at two photos side by side, or sorry, one photo at a time, and you rank it as from -3 to a 3. Did you hate it? You love it? Clearly, people in Kaysville like green space. Those rank the highest for each every scenario. And you see the commercial developments, kind of big business or open surface parking lot, ranking low on the bottom. And this is just data that's been collected. So this stuff's from the public comments. You know, there were a lot of pages, so I just picked out a few highlights. I think just to summarize maybe what I've read out of it, tells a lot of what you hear here and expect. There wasn't a lot of wow factor. Oh, I didn't realize Kaysville like that. I mean, it's probably what you would expect from the type of feedback. More of the same, more or less, what we hear on a regular basis. Land use, so this is the data that's been collected, talks about how we're currently built. Clearly, Kaysville is a single-family residential city. It's about 3,200 acres there on that large one. 923 is the other open vacant ag with little bits of commercial, education, industrial, spread throughout. So that's the makeup of our community currently. And they talk about that a little bit with water income housing plan will be a component of this process and things that come out is what we have and what we'll be producing so that we can share the reports as they continue to provide data to the group to look at. You're welcome to provide feedback or questions you have that you haven't seen. Traffic growth, what's kind of interesting is actually a reduction there's the south end of Main Street. But pretty much every other example, you're seeing additional traffic come onto our roads, primarily near Smith's Marketplace, Franklin 200 area, 240+% growth to the amount of traffic we're seeing there, particular time frame. And so they're working on those alternatives, continuing to get additional data on existing conditions, develop those concepts, take to the community in early September. There'll be some internal input going to the public shortly after for additional comments. So at any time, if there's ideas, things you'd like expressed or seen embedded through the plan, you're welcome to pass that along. If you'd like to see or vet through any of the data or something that's kind of welcome input from the commission. I encourage you to help us plan and put that forward. But certainly just wanted to put that on your radar if you're curious about what's been happening. It'll get pretty interesting here in the next month plus as we start to see that data wrap up and those alternatives be produced as the what are the possibilities, and of course they're just a couple examples.
What's that?
4-lane freeway.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it could be anything from you don't build, you build a ton, you build new roads, you prioritize parks, where do you put things, what big, what the plan is, future land use, map and source that helps us designate, predict how things will go. So it would include all those ideas and elements and things that work for the public. Just a quick update on it, I guess. If there are questions or things for me.
I have a question about this. I'm just curious, like, you know, I participated, I think it was Vision 2050, like it was like something probably related to that, like several years ago, like a survey that they did. And the way that they conducted it was like a choice survey. So you had to like make trade-offs. Like in other words, you couldn't like just say you wanted everything, right? You had to kind of stay like where they could hone in on what was really important to you. What was kind of interesting at the end, they kind of told you what the economic impact would be like. So if you chose that path, this is what the cost would be. And so, like, obviously, if you chose, you wanted a bunch of open space and you wanted to keep all the farms and everything close to where you like people live, that's going to cost a lot of money to keep it that way and preserve open space. So I guess one of the questions I have is like, so, you know, obviously people value open space and that's what the survey is showing. But do we have any idea what that cost is to implement that vision? And if people were told that's what the cost was, would they still choose that way, or would they scale that back and change how they felt?
Yeah, I think we could encourage the implementation of something like that. I don't know if this is what you did, but the Envision Utah effort pretty recently, within the last few years, was very heavy in that. So if you want to spread out, that means you're going to have to travel more, here's your impact on air, here's the cost of highways. And so it took in the social, environmental, and economic impacts of different types of choices and developments that people made. And so we could encourage, I don't know if it'll be as robust as, I don't know if that's the one you participated in, but I've seen the different levels. That's kind of the intent of the alternatives, is to educate, here's what it looks like, here are the costs, trade-offs, and impacts that needs to do in different ways. So yeah, I'd be very happy to, as we kind of start to see those ideas come out, be glad to get your input on that, Commissioner. Is that addressing maybe what you'd like to see out of it or not? If we can work with the consultants and get better in there to educate the public on implications of the choices that, yeah, they may choose to preserve every square foot of open space, but as long as they know, triple taxes to do it, to afford it, then that could be their choice, but at least they're an informed choice at that point. We can provide that data. So yeah, you have to talk to them, encourage that type of process. I'll let you see that.
One quick question I had was, and I should have brought this up when we've talked in our meetings with landmark, design on this before, not the planning commission meetings, but the general plan committee, I guess. It seems like I may have brought this up, or some other commissioners in the past have brought this up. But in our current general plan, correct me if I'm wrong, it says something along the lines of, affordable housing, number one, should be spread throughout the city, and that 10% of the housing needs to be quote unquote affordable. I don't know if that's a state mandate, and I don't know if the bill that we went through recently last year changed that. But the questions come up before, and is Landmark in a position to provide some of this data, if anything, that says, here is our best estimate of what type of quote unquote affordable housing we have, or multifamily housing we have, number one, and number two, here's where it's generally dispersed and here's where it's not dispersed. That would be very beneficial data for us to have as we have rezones, for example, in the future. Oftentimes when rezones come up, one of the concerns that people have, and it's more dense of a rezone, it's requesting more density. Citizens will say it's too dense and we have too much already over here. And we already have our burden. We have our share of the load. I think we should, if we can, get data that's in our back pocket, in our minds at least, to say, is this certain citizen, or are these citizens actually saying the facts, or are they just saying what their perception, which is, their immediate vicinity? That kind of data would be very beneficial for those rezone requests that are requesting more density.
Yeah, I think that.
Hey, Chairman, this is Kwan. I just wondered if I can just interject. I think you bring up a good point about having this data, because obviously basically every meeting, people bring up the same issue. And obviously that's their right, the First Amendment right. But I'm wondering if there's an FAQ where you click on, let's say, hey, it talks about, I don't know, PUD and whatnot, and then, it has links to, or maybe, an overview, here's what it is, and if you want to look at the footnotes, here's what it is, and then again, just like what you're saying, the statistics, I think it's a great idea for us to have, but let's also put it out there so it can be reviewed, it can be reviewed, but yeah, I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, I'll make note of that now. So I know they have some data that relates to the types of housing and how much we have. And I think we can go further into location and find the appropriate way to market values and process those items. So you might do that.
You could almost, this might be getting too far into the weeds, but you could almost divide the city up into certain areas and say this general vicinity has this percent or this quantity of affordable, quote unquote, affordable housing or multifamily housing, one or the other, which they're not always synonymous. And then this area has the same, certain same numbers, or what are the numbers in this area and all throughout the city. And then you can compare and you can just group it that way. That's not maybe their best solution, that's an idea. Okay, so any comments or questions on the general plan process? All right, let's, we already had called the public, so let's do reports, correspondence, calendar, next item.
Yeah, so just a couple things. October 6th, I sent out an email to the commission. I've heard from most, if not all of you. We'll be having a meeting together with the city council. So if you haven't seen that, we save the date on your calendar. And then it's been a while since this group's gotten together to make sure we're in alignment, working together to best interest of Kaysville. So more details to follow. Let's get that on the calendar there. Our next meeting will be here, so almost certainly, but it may may be our last. So I've reached out to Davis Tech. They're not available on the 24th to host us. There's a very slim chance that the building's ready for us to occupy. So there's some issues that are still being resolved, but I think we'll continue to be here probably for the next one.
Which would be the 10th?
Be the 10th.
Okay.
Primarily because I won't know in time to notice all of our items that need to be on that meeting. So I think if there's any chance it's actually ready by the 10th, I won't know until just before the 10th.
Oh,
I'm gonna send out
so
public
we're,
notice.
so we're still open 10th year. 24th, we should be in the city.
We almost have no choice but to be there, because just about nobody else can host us, and this space is no longer available, at least on that particular night, so.
Yep.
It is very close, it's coming along, it'll be a great space, to meet in once it's there. And then the other item I had also sent out, League of Cities, Towns, and, the APA. I probably didn't send this, maybe I did send it.
Yeah.
Anyway, if I didn't send it out, their conference is coming up about a month from now. It's all online, so it's a kind of different format than usual. But if you're available or interested in any part of that, I sent out kind of the agenda and schedule out of their items that you think you would like to learn about. Let me know. There's some cost for that. Likely we can get you involved in participating, but we just want to assess that first, depending on the amount of interest, as we're a large group of bodies. So I think with
It's
that.
pretty much all virtual, all on a few field trips.
And I wasn't sure how the field trips work out there. They're still coming, I guess, to sign up for, so there is some availability to go see some things. I think they said that come the first part of September, that would be available, so we'll keep you apprised of that. The council, just as by way of update and report, we have 3 ordinance items in the board until from the last, and rezone. So the rezone off of 200, or 100 South, 100 North Street, about 250 East, for the 6 townhomes. It was recommended by this body, was denied by the city council. We had 2 ordinances for trees on corners, which was approved by the council, and then the accessory unit location and height. They recommend, well, not approved, but they recommended just come back to the council for final version of that. On the accessory dwelling, accessory structures, there were some tweaks that the council requested, but primarily simply to leave the building height calculated the way we currently do it on an accessory structure. Otherwise, they asked to come back with the ordinance for that. They were with the accessory dwelling unit discussion. There's a difference there on whether or not that should be passed as this body recommended. So there's work to be done on that before it's back before the city council. So that's on hold for a while. Council's direction, they wanted at the very least additional data to understand utility and infrastructure impacts and other items. So we'll continue working with them on that particular issue. And then I think those are my reports, calendar items, unless there are items from commission for me.
Okay. Okay, thanks a lot. Unless there's anything else, I'll take a motion to adjourn. All right. And we are adjourned.
Good timing, air system.
Yeah.